Ever since the end of Israel's unlawful 12-day aggressive war on Iran, Western-controlled media assets can't stop crowing over the crown prince. Son of the Iranian monarch deposed in 1979, the prince has been given prime media coverage as he touts a vastly different Iran, one he would shepherd after a U.S.-imposed regime change. But who is the prince, and more importantly, what is the story of his famous father, the Shah of Iran? Sincere thanks to all our new subscribers and viewers. We humbly ask that you give a thumbs up and share this, and that you please subscribe to keep high-quality content coming your way. Now back to the video. The Pahlavi dynasty, if it can be called such, began in the 1920s with Reza Khan, the grandfather of today's crown prince. Great Britain, the dominant colonial power, opted to stabilize Iran as a barrier to expanding Bolshevism, believing this would protect their prized colony, India. The British saw the weakness of Iran's then-ruling dynasty, the Qajar, and determined to replace it. They selected Colonel Reza Khan as the next ruler of Iran, although the British role remained hidden. Khan was from a modest background, not part of any hereditary dynasty, but rather from a village in the Mazandaran province. He commanded a regiment of Cossacks, and with the help of the British, overthrew the civil government. In 1925, through a series of clever moves, he consolidated military might under his command and obtained emergency powers from Iran's lawmakers. They later voted to depose the current Shah and to replace him with Reza Khan. To further cement his prominence, Khan added to his name Pahlavi, which is the name of an ancient language of Iran. Once the Third Reich era began, the Shah formed a friendly partnership with Germany, in part to frustrate Iran's then adversaries, Great Britain and Soviet Russia. Iran purchased half its foreign goods from Germany at this time. German engineers went to Iran to help with road, rail, and other infrastructure construction. At the time of the German invasion of the USSR in 1941, approximately 2,000 Germans were in Iran. Fear of a growing military alliance between Iran and Germany prompted swift action on the part of the Allies. Great Britain and the Soviet Union invaded and occupied Iran in August of 1941. The Shah believed that occupying Soviet troops planned to march into Tehran to depose him, and so he abdicated the throne in September, fleeing to the island of Mauritius, which was then a colony of Britain. Mauritius is an island located in the Indian Ocean east of Madagascar. Reza Shah's departure left his 23-year-old son Mohammad to take the throne. With his country occupied and his youth and inexperience, the new Shah was not able to fully assert his power until 1946, after the Soviet occupiers left. The decades-long British colonial dominance over Iran was threatened after World War II with the rise of nationalist sentiment. This trend brought Mohammad Mossadegh to power as prime minister in 1951. Mossadegh was committed to expelling the British from Iran's oil industry, and in 1951, Iran's parliament voted for nationalization. The flow of oil from Iran was key to Great Britain's high standard of living. The British determined coup d'etat was the best action to restore their control over Iranian oil. Unfortunately for the British, Mossadegh heard about the approaching coup attempt and closed the British embassy, preventing the use of diplomatic staff in the coup. British intelligence then appealed to the United States for assistance, arguing that overthrowing Mossadegh would roll back communism, despite the fact Mossadegh was not a communist. On this flimsy premise, and with the help of a compliant media, the CIA began its first regime change project in Iran. Kermit Roosevelt was the CIA's man in the Middle East. In an interesting synchronicity, he was the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, under whose leadership America's regime change era accelerated. TR's grand design to build the Panama Canal prompted him to stage a revolution in Colombia to create an independent Panama. His scheme worked, and he got his canal. The younger Roosevelt ran a disinformation campaign to discredit Mossadegh, paid agents provocateurs to foment chaos on the streets, and readied his hand-picked savior of Iran for just the right moment. The anti-Mossadegh crowds seized a Tehran radio station. Police and military commanders, bribed by Roosevelt, joined crowds of demonstrators as they stormed into government buildings and police stations. In the final battle to arrest Mossadegh at his residence, forces loyal to him exchanged fire with coup d'etat soldiers armed with Sherman tanks. The battle lasted 9 hours. Mossadegh surrendered, His replacement in waiting, General Zahedi, emerged on cue and became the new prime minister. The Shah had fled to Rome at the first sign of conflict, and now returned to reclaim the peacock throne. The next quarter century of his reign was marked by unprecedented abuses of human rights, despite the Shah's close association with the United States, a self-described beacon of liberty to the entire world. The Shah reversed the oil industry nationalization and instead invited into Iran Western energy companies such as Standard Oil, Gulf, Mobil, and Texaco. Under the Shah, most political dissent was not tolerated. Opposition parties, along with their newspapers, were suppressed. What opposition existed tended to come from the religious leaders. Among these, one emerged as the most vocal and effective opponent of the Shah. His name was Ayatollah Khomeini, later the supreme leader of Iran. In his speeches and writings, Khomeini repeatedly condemned the Shah as tyrannical, as un-Islamic, and as a traitor to Iran who allowed it to be dominated by foreign powers, America in particular. In response to this criticism, the Shah had the Ayatollah arrested and later exiled to Turkey. Khomeini's following increased to the point where every action the Shah took against Khomeini would result in large public protests. Under the Shah's rule, a political police force called Savak was established, with help from the CIA and the Israeli Mossad. Ordinary people who detested the Shah were kept in line by Savak's tactics. The agency denied jobs, promotions, passports, and exit visas. Savak pressured family members, made arrests without charges, detained subjects without trial, exiled them to remote provinces, tortured, and even threatened them with murder. Savak was thought to be behind the killing of Ali Shariati, an anti-Shah activist intellectual living in England, and also the mysterious death by poisoning of Khomeini's 45-year-old son. Monarchical repression produced demonstrations by an outraged populace, which were often violently quelled by the armed forces. One example illustrates the Shah's methods. When thousands wearing black shirts marched from Qom to Tehran, the Shah's Air Force repeatedly fired on them from above. The government reported that 86 died in the anti-government protests in 1963. However, other sources estimated the number of deaths as high as 10,000. Now banished, the Ayatollah Khomeini kept up his campaign against the Shah, from Iraq and later from Paris. His pamphlets and audio-taped speeches were smuggled into the country, stoking the anti-Pahlavi sentiment. By 1977, outrage against the Shah began a crescendo into full-blown revolution. There were strikes in the oil production sector and later a general strike, while anti-government protests and marches continued. Events forced the Shah to declare a military government. His forces continued their brutal tactics to suppress the protests, but some soldiers had reportedly deserted their garrisons. Others left the ranks and joined with the protesters they were assigned to police, while some even supplied weapons to the revolutionaries. In mid-January 1979, the Shah flew to Egypt, but believed that he might be brought back after another military coup set things right. But 1979 was not 1953, and he would not be returning to the throne. Citizens flooded the streets in celebration and took down statues of the Shah and his father. 2 weeks later, Khomeini and his advisors flew from Paris to Tehran to begin setting up the new government. The Pahlavi era came to an end. Or did it? In the aftermath of Israel's June 2025 aggression against Iran, Western media began aggressively hyping the so-called Crown Prince of Iran. The son of Mohammad Pahlavi Shah, Reza Pahlavi, was born in Tehran in 1960 and has lived in exile since the end of his father's monarchy in 1979. He says he has a plan for the next phase of Iranian government. In the arena of curious timing, a Politico article from April 2025, just 2 months prior to Israel's illegal attack, records that the prince urges strikes by oil workers as a means of weakening the Islamic Republic. Coincidentally, strikes in that sector were a major factor in bringing down the regime of his father, the Shah. Media promotion of Pahlavi is reminiscent of the West's promotion of Ahmed Chalabi as the savior of Iraq after the U.S. invasion of that country in 2003. Chalabi was born in Iraq but left with his family in 1958 after the Iraqi king Faisal II was overthrown. American supporters touted Chalabi as, quote, the George Washington of Iraq. He had CIA backing, but his service in the interim government of the new Iraq disappointed his benefactors. He was at various times accused of fraud, corruption, and counterfeiting, and died in 2015. There's no evidence that the prince would govern any less tyrannically than his father, despite his claims to the contrary. He is 100% American-backed and would be just as beholden to U.S. interests. In 2023, Pahlavi and his wife visited Israel. He met with Netanyahu, prayed at the wall. Like his father before him, the prince is thoroughly pro-Israel, and he spouts that country's propaganda as dutifully as if it were his own. This Israeli connection is all the more insulting after Israel's 12-day orgy of assassinations and missile attacks against Iran. Astroturfing Pahlavi as savior to Iran is absurd on its face, and just as likely to fail as the West's previous stunt with Chalabi in Iraq, recalling the adage that those who learn nothing from history are fated to repeat it.